This session is eventually going to cover a motion type, and it won't be that too long. And again, hello, a brief introduction. I'm Sanjeev, a friend from second year, and I will be taking today's session on a very interesting motion type, that is THP. That is to say that this house prefers. In this very motion type, there are a few subcategories. That is to say, this house prefers X, this house prefers X over Y, and this house prefers a world of X, right? All these types comes under an umbrella of THP, but this is a very small deviated motion burden and a certain kind of different approach that can be taken into these different types of motion burden in itself. Debar, we can move to the next page. It's a little bit up. Yep, perfect, perfect. So yeah, uh, this house prefers X. In this type of motion, you just go ahead and raise a clash with the status quo. That is to say, they have to raise a clash on the existing norm in society. You prefer X thing to happen over what's already happening in the status quo. And our burden is to defend the status quo and tell why the preference of X is certainly going to be very bad on a comparative, and how you can generate better value in status quo. For example, that's already given in this slide is something that this house prefers Rahul Gandhi as Prime Minister of India, right? The basic burden of government in this very motion is to tell that why Rahul Gandhi would be a better prime minister, right? And on clash with the existing status quo, that is the party of power, right? And that is in case BJP, right? And again, what is op burden, right? Op burden is eventually very simple, right? They will have to defend the delta that is being created by BJP, while Modi, being the prime minister, is better than Rahul Gandhi, right? So on that very thing, you have to draw a certain comparative that why this X thing is certainly going to be better than the status quo, and you have to generate any value as government. And as opposition, you have to just tell that okay, whatever you're preferring as X is certainly not very good in terms of a comparison with the status quo in itself. Before moving on to the next motion type within the motion type, do you have any questions? Yep. Assuming not, moving on to the next type. They were, I can just scroll thoda niche. Yep. This house prefers X over Y. The motion in itself suggests that something needs to be preferred, right? But again, like for example, you prefer chocolate over cake or something like that, right? The exclusive deviated burden from the initial th as an X motion is something that you don't need to defend the status quo, right? And rather operate on a comparative as to why do you prefer X as government and Y for opposition, right? In this very thing, you have to draw a comparative between X and Y as to why you prefer this over that, or eventually for opposition for that why do you prefer Y over X. In this type of motion, both sides needs to draw a certain kind of a comparative on how X and Y operates in status quo, and why do you eventually go ahead and prefer X over Y or Y over X as opposition, right? Example, like this house prefers Devarga over Sanjeev, right? Simply to take right off as government, I'll just need to provide a certain comparative as to why Debargia would be a better take over Sanjeev, right? I think even in earlier session, I think it was Alithya who draw a comparative, right? That okay, benefit of having Debargia is something like that. He gives you occasional treat, he cares for you, he listens to you, etc., etc., right? And on a comparative, what do you get when you like say ki Sanjeev is better, or like is the preferred guy over Debargia, right? In terms, you can just say that okay, he will tell you jokes and he will make be it's fun to be around him, right? Something like that, right? So on that very basis, you have to tell that why do you prefer X over Y as government and Y over X as opposition, right? That eventually you have to draw certain comparative and benefits, and again, how do you weigh it off, right? At the end of the day, you have to just weigh it off, and that why do you prefer X over Y on certain values or benefit that you can extract out of that very particular thing, right? Any question? Still, assuming none. Moving on to the next word, motion type, right? Yup. This house prefers a world X, right? On government, you need to build a certain kind of world from t is equals to zero, right? What do you mean by t is equals to zero, right? That you have to tell that how X came into play and then why, should be a set of premise on how things will eventually go ahead and manifest or will manifest, and why that thing is certainly going to be very good for the status quo in itself, right? This is a basic burden that the government has to follow anyhow. And again, what is this basic burden for opposition, right? You have to come and defend what the status quo simply looks like and then directly compare it to the ghost world, right? When you build two different worlds, that is to say from government side a world from t is equals to zero, and again certainly for opposition that the status quo in itself, you have to clash both these worlds as to how much value you are able to generate and which world stands better at the end of the debate, right? That is to say that now you have two worlds in government world where X came into play from t is equals to zero, and opposition where status quo is still prevailing, right? What if at any point in time the government forgets to make a world from t is equals to zero and rather make a world from, you know, t is equals to t, right? That is to say, like from the status quo in itself, right? Where the whole thing changes, right? And in this case, op can simply call out government on this, lack of burden fulfillment and whatever they propose, right? Simply meaning that now whatever opposition proposed that from t is equals to zero the world would look like, the whole debate and the framing is according to the side opposition, right? Which should not be the ideal case for the government, because again, it would be very, bad for you in itself, right? And again, let's understand with a, example in itself, right? The example states that this house prefers a world where matriarchy is the dominant narrative, right? In this motion, you have to go back on how the world operated, and from t is equals to zero, when matriarchy was certainly, introduced, and its ideology, it's certainly go ahead and operated on, right? Simply meaning that now, what happens if matriarchy becomes a dominant norm from t is equals to zero and not from the status quo in itself, where patriarchy already persists, right? The government can simply go ahead and just say that okay, matriarchy is something, and if it would be a it would be a, more dominant norm, people would be happy, there would be more caregiving society, etc., etc., right? And again, the government again has to, as the opposition, you have to again defend the status quo, like, right, okay, it's even if it's a dominant norm, patriarchy still stands better because again for blah blah XX reasons, right? That now it makes women more competitive, etc., etc., right? So on this very basis, you have to draw a certain world and you have to clash it with one another to explain it, that what is the extracting value that you eventually go ahead and you create within this world, and again operate that why do you prefer a world where X is happening or where the status quo in general is prevailing. Uh, there were your next slide. Yeah, I think that's that, right? It's a like very easy motion type. And so yeah, like what are we supposed to like go with the mock, right?